The door didn't slam. That was the part that stayed with them the longest. No crash of wood against frame, no final explosion of anger to mark the end of something. It closed softly, almost politely, as if nothing important had just happened, as if two lives hadn't just been pushed out of whatever shape they once had and left standing on a cracked concrete step with nowhere to go. The older brother stood there for a moment longer than he should have, staring at the peeling paint on the door, half expecting it to open again. He didn't knock, he didn't beg. Something inside him had already learned that begging only makes things worse. His hand tightened around the strap of the backpack slung over his shoulder, a cheap, fraying thing stuffed with everything they owned. It wasn't much, a spare shirt, a broken flashlight, a pocket knife with a chipped blade. He'd packed it earlier that day without saying why, just a quiet instinct telling him to be ready. The younger brother hovered close, small fingers wrapped around a dented metal lunch tin that rattled softly when he moved. Inside was a crust of bread and half an apple, browned and soft. He didn't cry. That came later. Right now his eyes were wide and searching, darting from the closed door to his brother's face, waiting for instructions the way younger brothers always do. The older one swallowed and nodded once, more to himself than to the boy. "Come on," he said, keeping his voice steady. "We're not staying here." The street looked different when you knew you didn't belong on it anymore. The houses leaned in too close, windows like watching eyes. Porch lights flicked on as the sun slid lower, one by one, signaling dinners and warmth and locked doors. The brothers walked fast, not running but not slow either. Running draws attention, their shoes scuffed against the pavement, soles thin enough that every crack pressed through. The younger brother stumbled once, and the older caught him by the arm without breaking stride. They didn't talk about where they were going because there was no answer. They just moved, past the last row of houses, past the rusted mailbox that leaned sideways like it was tired of standing, past the place where the road narrowed and the sidewalks gave up entirely. The smell of cut grass faded, replaced by damp earth and something older, something that felt like it had been there long before people started building straight lines and calling them streets. By the time darkness really settled in, hunger had started to make itself known. Not the sharp, immediate kind, but the dull ache that spread slow and heavy, making every step feel longer than the last. The younger brother finally asked the question he'd been holding back. "Where are we sleeping?" The older brother didn't answer right away. He scanned the horizon, looking for anything. An abandoned shed, a culvert, a bridge, something. He knew better than to promise things he couldn't give. Finally, he said, "Somewhere dry." It wasn't much, but it was honest. They cut across a field where the grass reached their knees, seeds sticking to their pants. The moon climbed higher, cold and white, lighting the way just enough to see where to put their feet. In the distance, a line of dark shapes rose against the sky. Trees, old ones by the look of it, clustered thickly together like they were keeping secrets. The younger brother slowed, fear creeping into his steps. "There's animals," he whispered. "Yeah," the older brother said. "So are we." That earned a weak, uncertain smile, and they kept going. The woods swallowed sound. The farther they went, the quieter it became, until even their breathing felt too loud. Leaves crunched underfoot, and the smell of rot and rain hung heavy in the air. At some point, the younger brother started shivering, not just from the cold, but from the realization that no one was coming to get them. The older brother noticed and draped his jacket around the smaller shoulders, even though it left him exposed. They walked until their legs burned and their thoughts blurred. Then, just as exhaustion threatened to knock them flat, the ground dipped sharply ahead. The older brother stopped short, throwing an arm out to block the younger one. Careful. They approached slowly, peering down into the shallow ravine, and there it was. The sycamore tree lay on its side like a fallen giant, roots torn up and exposed, a mass of dirt and stone clinging to them. Its trunk was enormous, wider than the brothers were tall together. Age and storms had split it lengthwise, the heartwood hollowed out over years of decay. From the outside it looked dead, useless, something you stepped around. Without a second glance, the older brother crouched, shining the broken flashlight into the opening. The beam flickered, then steadied, revealing a dark cavity that ran deep into the trunk. Dry leaves lined the floor. The wood was soft in places but solid enough in others, thick walls blocking the wind. He reached in, touching the inside. It was cool, but not wet. The younger brother leaned over his shoulder. "Is it safe?" The older brother didn't know. He knew trees could collapse. He knew animals could claim spaces like this. He knew 100 things that could go wrong. But he also knew the cold was getting worse, and the open ground offered nothing but exposure. "It's better than nothing," he said finally. They crawled inside on hands and knees, the bark scraping against their backs. The space widened as they moved deeper, enough that they could sit without hunching completely over. The air smelled like old wood and soil. Not pleasant, but not dangerous either. The opening faced away from the wind, shielded by the bulk of the trunk and a tangle of fallen branches. The younger brother sat down hard, clutching his lunch tin like it might disappear if he let go. His breath hitched, then broke, and the tears finally came. Quiet at first, then shaking, unstoppable sobs that curled him inward. The older brother froze, panic flashing through him. He'd never been good at this part. He knelt awkwardly, then pulled the younger one close, pressing his forehead against the boy's hair. "It's okay," he murmured, even though he wasn't sure it was. "I've got you. I've got you." The words felt thin, but he kept saying them until the sobs slowed to sniffles, and then to silence. Outsea. The forest creaked and shifted, branches knocking softly together. Somewhere, an animal moved through the undergrowth, unseen. They ate the bread and apple slowly, dividing it carefully, chewing until there was nothing left to savor. Hunger didn't go away, but it eased enough to let them think. The older brother arranged leaves into a thicker layer on the ground, creating a crude bed. He positioned the backpack near the opening, partly as a windbreak, partly because it made him feel like he was doing something useful. When they finally lay down, curled on their sides to conserve warmth, the reality of their situation pressed in. No home, no adults, no plan, just a fallen tree and the promise of another cold night. The younger brother whispered into the dark, "Are they going to come back for us?" The older brother stared at the curved ceiling of the trunk, at the faint cracks where moonlight seeped through. He thought of the closed door, the quiet finality of it. He chose his words carefully. "I don't know," he said, "but we're not going back there." "Why?" "Because," he said slowly, "out here, at least we know where we stand." The younger brother didn't reply. His breathing evened out, exhaustion pulling him under despite everything. The older brother stayed awake longer, listening, counting the sounds of the forest until they stopped feeling like threats and started feeling like a rhythm. His stomach hurt, his hands were cold, fear sat heavy in his chest. But beneath it all was something else, small but stubborn. They had made it through the night without the world ending. As sleep finally crept in, the older brother rested a hand against the rough inner wall of the sycamore, feeling its solid presence. It was broken, rotting, forgotten. And yet, it had given them a place to stop running. That, he thought, might be enough to get them through tomorrow. Morning didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, diluted by the thick walls of the fallen sycamore. Light seeped through narrow cracks in the bark, thin silver lines that shifted as the sun climbed. The older brother woke first, not because he was rested, but because his body refused to relax fully. Every muscle ached from the hard ground. His fingers were stiff with cold, curled slightly inward like they had forgotten how to open. For a moment, panic hit him, sharp and fast, until he remembered where he was. The smell of damp wood and leaf rot, the curved ceiling inches above his face, the soft, steady breathing beside him. The younger brother slept with his knees pulled tight to his chest, one hand still wrapped around the metal lunch tin even though it was empty now. His face looked younger in sleep, smoothed of worry in a way that hurt to see. The older brother watched him for a long second, then carefully shifted his weight, wincing as his back protested. Outside, the forest was waking up. Birds called to one another, sharp and insistent. Something small rustled near the roots, squirrels maybe, or mice. The sounds were close, closer than anything on the street ever had been. Out there, noise meant danger. In here, it just meant life going on. The older brother crawled toward the opening and peeked out. Dew clung to everything, turning spiderwebs into delicate nets of glass. The air was colder than he expected, but cleaner. He breathed it in deeply, letting it fill his lungs. No cars, no voices, no rules shouted from behind walls, just trees. He crawled back inside and gently shook the younger brother's shoulder. "Hey, wake up." The boy stirred, blinking slowly, confusion clouding his eyes until memory snapped back into place. His grip tightened on the tin. "We're still here?" he asked quietly. "Yeah," the older brother said. "And we're okay." That wasn't entirely true, but it was close enough to matter. They sat up, backs against the inner wall of the trunk, listening. The older brother took inventory the way he always did when things felt out of control. Backpack still there, knife still in his pocket. Flashlight, dead now, finally. Food, gone. Water, none. The sycamore, though, he studied it with fresh eyes in daylight. The rot was worse in some places than he'd realized. Patches of wood crumbled under his touch, flakes coming away like damp paper. But deeper in, the trunk was dense and solid, growth rings packed tight from decades of surviving storms. The hollow wasn't natural alone. It had been shaped over time by insects, moisture, and neglect, carved into something usable by accident. "It's ugly," the younger brother said, wrinkling his nose. "Yeah," the older brother agreed. Then, after a pause, "But it works." They crawled out fully, stretching stiff limbs. The younger brother stamped his feet to get feeling back into them, while the older one walked slow circles around the tree, inspecting it like a builder might inspect a ruined house. The roots formed a wall on one side, thick and tangled, lifting earth into a natural barrier. On the other, fallen branches lay scattered, remnants of the same storm that had brought the tree down years ago. Moss grew thick along the shaded side, green and spongy. The opening they'd used faced east, catching morning light but shielding them from the strongest wind. It wasn't just shelter, it was positioned well. The older brother felt something unfamiliar twist in his chest. Not hope exactly, more like possibility. They spent the morning moving quietly, afraid at first to go too far from the tree. Every snapped twig made the younger brother flinch. Every bird bursting into flight sent his heart racing. The older brother kept himself between the forest and his brother, eyes constantly scanning. They found water first, a shallow dip in the ground where rain had collected, dark but still. The older brother frowned at it, then pulled the knife and scraped away leaves, letting clearer water seep up from beneath. He tasted a drop on his finger, grimaced but nodded. "We'll boil it later," he said, more confident than he felt. They gathered what they could carry. Fallen branches for fire, big ones for structure, smaller ones for kindling. Bark peeled easily from dead wood, curling into dry strips perfect for catching flame. The younger brother helped, dragging pieces twice his size, face set in determined concentration. By midday, hunger returned with a vengeance. It gnawed at them, sharper than before now that they were awake and moving. The younger brother asked about food, his voice careful, like he was afraid of the answer. "We'll find something," the older brother said. "Just not yet." They went back to the sycamore and worked. Inside the hollow, the older brother cleared debris, scooping out rotted wood and damp leaves, piling them outside to dry. He tested the walls again and again, pressing his weight against them, listening for ominous cracks. The tree held. It creaked softly, but no more than it already had. They dragged branches across the opening, weaving them together, then packed mud and leaves into the gaps. It wasn't pretty. It didn't need to be. When they stepped back, the opening was smaller now, less obvious. From a distance it looked like nothing more than another tangle of deadwood. Camouflage. The younger brother watched with wide eyes. "How do you know how to do this?" The older brother shrugged. "I don't. I'm just guessing. Looks like you do." That made him pause. No one had ever said that to him before. He turned away before the younger brother could see his expression change. They built a fire pit just outside the opening, small and low, ringed with stones half buried in the soil. The older brother struck the knife against a rock, sparks flying uselessly at first. His hands shook from cold and hunger, frustration building with each failed attempt. "Let me try," the younger brother said suddenly. The older brother hesitated, then handed over the knife. The boy crouched low, mimicking what he'd seen, tongue caught between his teeth. On the third strike, a spark caught, smoke curled upward, thin and fragile. They both froze, then flame blossomed. It wasn't big. It barely deserved the name, but it was fire. The younger brother laughed, a sharp, breathless sound that startled both of them. The older brother clapped a hand over his mouth instinctively, eyes darting to the trees. "Quiet," he hissed. Then softer, but, "Good job." They fed the fire slowly, careful not to let it grow too bright. Smoke drifted upward and vanished. Ed into the branches overhead, broken and scattered. The heat soaked into their hands, into their bones. For the first time since the door had closed behind them, the older brother felt something like relief. As the day wore on, they refined the space. Leaves became bedding, bark became insulation, a flat stone became a table of sorts. They learned where the sycamore was weakest and where it was strongest, where to lean and where not to touch. The tree creaked as it warmed in the sun, then settled again as shadows lengthened. In the afternoon, the younger brother disappeared for a moment and returned with a handful of bright red berries. "Can we eat these?" The older brother examined them carefully. He'd learned the hard way that bright often meant dangerous. He shook his head. "No, not those." The younger brother nodded, not arguing, and tossed them aside. As evening approached, clouds rolled in, heavy and gray. Wind whispered through the canopy. The brothers retreated inside their shelter, adjusting branches, pressing mud into fresh cracks. When rain finally came, it drummed softly against the bark, water running down the curve of the trunk and away from the opening. Inside they stayed dry. The younger brother noticed first. He pressed his hand against the inner wall, then held it out into the opening, feeling rain splash his fingers. "It's not coming in," he said, amazement creeping into his voice. The older brother listened to the rain, to the muffled way it struck the tree instead of them. He nodded slowly. "This thing's tougher than it looks." Night fell again, colder but less frightening than the one before. The fire burned low, hidden. They shared warmth, backs against the sycamore's heartwood. The forest sounded different now, less threatening, more familiar. The younger brother yawned, eyes heavy. "Is this our house now?" The older brother didn't answer right away. He thought of the word house, walls, doors, things that could be taken away. He rested his hand against the rough bark, feeling its solidity, its age. "For now," he said. "Yeah, for now." As sleep pulled them under, the sycamore stood silent around them, rotting, forgotten, broken. And yet, against all odds, it held. The third morning began with a sound the older brother didn't recognize right away. It slipped into his sleep like a thread pulled too tight, thin and urgent. He woke with his heart already racing, every sense sharpened. For a second, he thought it was a voice. Then he realized it was breathing, fast, uneven, close. The younger brother was awake, sitting upright, eyes fixed on the narrow opening where pale light filtered in. His shoulders were hunched, his hands clenched together so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "What is it?" the older brother whispered. "I heard something," the younger one said. Like footsteps." The older brother didn't move at first. He listened. The forest spoke in layers now that he'd learned its language a little better. The distant call of birds, the soft hiss of wind through leaves, the tiny movements of insects in the bark. Footsteps didn't belong to that pattern. Neither did voices. Neither did the sharp, deliberate breaking of twigs under weight. He held his breath. A branch snapped somewhere beyond the roots. The younger brother flinched so hard his elbow struck the inner wall of the trunk. The sound felt deafening. In the enclosed space, the older brother reached out and pulled him close, pressing his mouth to the boy's ear. "Don't move," he breathed. "Don't make a sound." They stayed like that, frozen, minutes stretching until they lost meaning. The older brother's mind raced through possibilities. A hiker, a hunter, someone walking a dog. Someone who would see smoke, notice disturbed ground, follow signs, someone who would ask questions. The sound came again, closer this time, heavy, careless. Then a low snort, followed by frantic rustling. The older brother's muscles loosened slightly. "Deer," he whispered. They waited longer just to be sure. Eventually, the forest settled back into itself. The younger brother let out a breath he'd been holding so long it came out as a sob. "That's why we have to be careful," the older brother said quietly. "People can't know we're here." The younger brother nodded, wiping his face with his sleeve. "Like hiding." "Exactly," the older brother said. "Like hiding, that became the rule of the day." They put out the fire completely, smothering the last embers with dirt and ash until no smoke rose at all. The older brother scattered the ashes wide, mixing them into the soil with a stick. He brushed away footprints, dragging branches behind him until the ground looked untouched again. The younger brother watched closely, copying him, serious and intent. They didn't leave the immediate area that morning. Instead, the older brother took time to study everything around them. He noticed how light moved through the trees, where shadows stayed longest. He watched ants march in lines toward unseen destinations. He memorized the paths animals used, the narrow two. Unknolls pressed into the grass. "See this?" he said, pointing to a faint trail. "That's not people. That's animals. People don't walk like that." "How do they walk?" the younger brother asked. The older brother smiled faintly. "Messier." They practiced moving quietly, slowly. The older brother showed him how to place his foot down heel first, then roll it forward, how to step on rocks instead of dry sticks, how to pause after every few steps and listen, really listen, before moving again. At first, the younger brother stumbled and snapped twigs, frustration flashing across his face. But he learned fast. By midday, he could move through the undergrowth with barely a sound, his small body weaving instinctively between obstacles. "You're good at this," the older brother said. The younger brother shrugged, but his eyes shone. Hunger returned before noon, sharper than the day before. The older brother knew they couldn't ignore it much longer. Energy mattered now. Mistakes happened when people were weak. They moved farther from the sycamore than before, careful to mark the way back in their minds. Bent branches, a split rock, a patch of ferns shaped like a hand. The forest changed subtly as they went, trees growing closer together, undergrowth thicker. They found mushrooms first, pale caps pushing through damp soil. The younger brother reached for one, then stopped himself. "Is this okay?" The older brother crouched beside him, studying it. He shook his head. "I don't know, so no." They left it untouched. Later they found blackberries tangled in thorny vines, dark and ripe. The older brother tested one carefully, rubbing it between his fingers, checking for mold. He ate a single berry and waited. When nothing happened, he nodded. "Just a few," he said. "Not too many." They ate slowly, savoring each burst of sweetness. Purple stained their fingers and lips. It wasn't enough, but it was something. On the way back, they spotted movement near a fallen log. The older brother froze, crouching low. He pulled the younger brother down with him. A mouse darted out, then another. The older brother watched them closely, his jaw tightening. He trapped mice before, years ago, with a neighbor who thought it was funny to teach kids how to do things no one else wanted to. He hadn't thought about it since. That night he worked, using string pulled from the inside seam of his jacket and a bent piece of wire scavenged from the forest edge. He set a crude snare near the log. He showed the younger brother how it worked, hands steady, voice calm. "We don't waste anything," he said, "and we don't do it unless we have to." The younger brother nodded, face pale but determined. "Okay." They returned to the sycamore before dark, moving in a wide circle to avoid creating a visible path. Inside, the space felt smaller now that they understood how fragile it was. Every sound echoed. Every movement mattered. That night they didn't light a fire. They huddled together for warmth, wrapped in leaves and jackets, listening. The forest felt closer in the dark, pressing in from all sides. The older brother barely slept, his mind replaying every sound, every possibility. At dawn, they checked the snare. The mouse lay still. The younger brother turned away immediately, swallowing hard. The older brother felt a pang of guilt, sharp and unexpected, but he pushed it aside. Survival did, and to allow room for too much thinking. He cleaned the mouse carefully, hands shaking only slightly. They cooked it over a tiny hidden flame, shielded by rocks and bark. The smell made his stomach twist, but when they ate, the warmth spread through them like relief. They didn't talk much after that. As days passed, patterns formed. They learned when to move and when to stay still. They learned how long smoke lingered and how to break it apart with branches. They learned that the forest had its own schedule, and if they followed it instead of fighting it, things went more smoothly. The younger brother grew quieter, sharper. He noticed things the older brother missed: tracks, changes in wind, distant sounds that didn't belong. Once he tugged the older brother's sleeve and pointed. "Listen." The older brother strained his ears. Faint voices drifted through the trees, carried on the wind. They vanished into the sycamore without hesitation, holding their breath as two figures passed by on the far edge of the woods. The men laughed, loud and careless, unaware of how close they came to changing everything. After that, the brothers spoke even less. Words felt dangerous, gestures and looks were safer. The sycamore changed too. What had first felt like a temporary refuge now felt like a secret, their secret. They adjusted it constantly, improving it in small ways: better insulation, better concealment. The opening disappeared behind layers of branches and mud until it was invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Inside, the space grew more organized. A corner for sleeping, a place to store gathered food, a spot for tools. The older brother marked the walls with small scratch. See, not to count days, but to remind himself that time was moving forward. One afternoon, rain came hard and sudden. The brother stayed inside, listening to water hammer against bark and roots. The younger brother traced patterns in the dirt floor with his finger. "Do you think people would find us if they looked?" he asked softly. The older brother considered the question carefully. "If they really wanted to, maybe," he said, But most people don't look too close. Why not? Because they think they already know what's there. The younger brother nodded, absorbing that. By the end of the week, the forest no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a place with rules. Strict ones, but fair. Stay quiet. Stay observant. Take only what you need. Leave as little trace as possible. They were no longer just hiding. They were surviving. And the sycamore, rotting and ignored, stood guard over their secret life, its broken body becoming something strong through patience and care. The idea didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, the way most important things did now. Quiet, almost unnoticeable at first, hiding inside ordinary moments. It began with dirt under fingernails, and the way the forest floor felt different beneath the roots of the sycamore. The younger brother was the one who noticed it first. He had been crouching near the exposed roots, poking at the ground with a stick while the older brother worked on tightening the woven branches at the shelter's entrance. At first, it looked like nothing more than idle movement, a child's way of staying busy. Then he froze. "Hey," he whispered, as if afraid the soil itself might hear him. "This dirt is soft." The older brother sat over. "All dirt's soft." "No," the younger one said, pushing his fingers deeper. "This is different." Curious despite himself, the older brother joined him. He knelt, pressed his palm into the ground and felt it immediately. The soil was dark, almost black beneath the layer of leaves, cool and crumbly instead of hard-packed. It smelled rich, alive. Not like the thin, dry earth closer to the trail, where grass struggled to survive. He straightened slowly, eyes drifting to the massive root system above them. The sycamore's roots twisted and curled like frozen waves, trapping moisture and fallen leaves year after year. Everything that died here stayed here, breaking down slowly, feeding the ground. "Good soil," he murmured before he could stop himself. The younger brother looked up at him, eyes bright. "Like for plants?" The older brother didn't answer right away. He stared at the ground, at the quiet potential hidden under layers of decay. His mind replayed things he'd half learned, half overheard in another life. People talking about gardens, about compost, about how food didn't always have to be hunted or scavenged. "Yeah," he said finally. "Like for plants, they didn't celebrate. They didn't even smile much. Experience had already taught them that hope could be dangerous if you let it grow faster than reality. Instead, they tested." The older brother dug a shallow hole with his hands, ignoring the sting of blisters reopening. The soil stayed loose even as he went deeper. Worms writhed briefly before disappearing back into the darkness. That was a good sign. He covered the hole again carefully, smoothing the surface so it looked untouched. That night, they talked quiet. Tly inside the sycamore, voices barely louder than breath. "If we grow food," the younger brother said, "we don't have to trap mice as much." The older brother nodded. He didn't say that growing food took time, that time meant hunger in between. The younger brother already knew that. Instead, he said, "If we do this, we do it right. Small. Hidden. Like us," the younger brother said. The next few days were spent collecting without anyone noticing what they were really doing. They didn't look for seeds at first. They looked for scraps. Evidence of life that wanted to keep living. Behind a distant farmhouse, the older brother found a compost pile, careless, exposed. He waited until night, then scavenged quietly, pulling potato eyes, onion bottoms, and wilted vegetable scraps that still clung stubbornly to life. He wrapped them carefully in leaves and carried them back like something fragile. The younger brother found seeds by accident, a discarded apple core near the road, a split pumpkin left to rot after someone's harvest. He brought them back with reverence, as if afraid speaking too loudly might kill them. They didn't plant everything at once. The older brother insisted on patience. They tested one small patch first, tucked close to the roots, hidden from sight unless you were already kneeling. They worked the soil gently, breaking it apart with sticks, pulling out stones, mixing in ash from old fires and crushed leaves. The younger brother watched every movement closely, mimicking him with intense focus. "Not too deep," the older brother said. "They need to breathe." They placed the potato eyes carefully, spaced apart. Onion bottoms followed, pressed just enough into two. He soil to hold them upright. Seeds came last, sprinkled lightly, almost apologetically, before being covered again. When they were done, the patch looked like nothing had happened at all. Just dirt. Just forest. The waiting was the hardest part. Days passed. Hunger came and went in waves. Some nights they ate berries and roots, other nights nothing at all. The older brother kept trapping, but sparingly now, careful not to overhunt any one area. The younger brother carried water daily from their hidden source, pouring it gently over the patch at dawn or dusk when no one could see. Every morning they checked the soil. Nothing. The younger brother tried not to show disappointment, but the older brother saw it anyway, the way his shoulders sagged, the way his eyes lingered just a second longer than necessary. "Plants don't hurry," the older brother said one morning. "They survive by waiting." The younger brother nodded. "We're good at that." On the 12th day, the younger brother gasped so loudly the older brother nearly tackled him to the ground. "There," the boy whispered, pointing. A thin green shoot had broken through the soil, trembling slightly in the breeze. It was fragile, barely more than a thread, but it was unmistakably alive. They stared at it in silence. Then another appeared. Then another. The older brother felt something tighten painfully in his chest. This wasn't scavenging. This wasn't taking from leftovers or luck. This was something they were making, something that might still be here tomorrow. They built protection next. A low fence of thorns and branches, woven tightly enough to discourage animals but loose enough to blend into the forest floor. They scattered leaves over everything, careful not to block the light entirely. Rain came and helped them. Sun came and helped them. The forest, indifferent but fair, allowed the plants to grow. As the shoots strengthened, the brothers changed with them. The younger brother became the caretaker, checking moisture, brushing away insects gently. The older brother watched the perimeter, scanning for signs of discovery. One afternoon, a rabbit found the patch. The younger brother noticed first, heart jumping into his throat. The rabbit froze, ears twitching, mouth full of green. The older brother moved without thinking, stepping forward slowly, arms raised. He didn't shout. He didn't charge. He made himself big, deliberate. The rabbit bolted. They reinforced the fence that night, adding more thorns, more branches. Loss was part of this too. They accepted that. Weeks passed. The potato plants thickened. Onion greens grew tall and sharp. Other plants emerged whose names they didn't know but whose strength they respected. The first harvest was small. 1 potato, 1 onion. They cooked them slowly, reverently, sharing every bite. The taste was simple, earthy, perfect. "We made this," the younger brother said, awe filling his voice. The older brother nodded. "Yeah, we did." From that moment on, the sycamore stopped being just a hiding place. It became the center of something growing outward, quietly, stubbornly. They composted carefully now, burying scraps near the roots. They rotated the patch, expanding inch by inch. They learned what worked and what didn't, what the soil accepted and what it rejected. They were still hungry sometimes, still afraid, still invisible. But now, when they lay down at night, the older brother could hear something else beneath the forest's rhythm. The slow, patient work of life continuing, because they had chosen not just to survive, but to plant. And beneath the broken roots of a rotting tree, the future pushed upward, green and unstoppable. By the time the leaves began to change color, the sycamore no longer felt like a place they were hiding inside. It felt like something they belonged to. The change wasn't sudden, it never was. It came in small, almost unnoticeable improvements layered over weeks, then months, until one day the older brother realized he no longer woke up bracing for disaster. He woke up listening, measuring, planning. The shelter had changed shape without really changing shape at all. The opening was tighter now, curved inward by layers of woven branches hardened with dried mud. From a distance it looked like nothing more than the tree continuing to rot naturally. Inside, though, everything had a place. They slept on a raised bed made from thick branches laid crosswise and packed with leaves, moss, and strips of bark. The ground beneath stayed cold and damp, but the bed stayed dry. The older brother had tested it again and again during storms, lying awake while rain hammered the forest, waiting for seepage that never came. Tools hung from knots in the inner walls: knife, string, wire, a stone sharpened smooth from use. Food scraps were stored carefully in bark containers. Seeds were wrapped in cloth and tucked high where mice couldn't reach. Even the fire pit had moved, shifted farther from the entrance and sunk deeper into the ground so smoke dispersed before it could gather. The sycamore creaked sometimes, especially at night when the temperature dropped. The first few times it happened, the younger brother startled awake, heart pounding. But the older brother learned the sounds, what was dangerous and what was just age settling in. He'd place his hand flat against the inner wall and feel the vibration, grounding himself. "It's just stretching," he'd whisper. "Like us." Outside, their small garden had expanded slowly, deliberately. Never enough to catch the eye, never neat enough to look intentional. The older brother had learned early that straight lines attracted attention. Nature preferred chaos, so they let the garden look wild. Plants grew unevenly, tucked between roots and fallen leaves, protected by thorn barriers disguised as storm debris. Food still wasn't abundant, but it was reliable. Potatoes grew thick underground, onions multiplied. A few stubborn greens survived despite shade and poor light. When they harvested, they did it in stages, never taking too much at once, always leaving something behind. The younger brother took pride in it. He talked to the plants sometimes when he thought no one was listening. Not full conversations, just quiet encouragement, murmured promises of water and protection. The older brother pretended not to notice, but he let him do it. Hunger didn't rule them anymore. It still existed, still reminded them of its presence, but it no longer controlled every decision. With that change came something unexpected: time. Time to observe, time to learn, time to think past the next meal. They noticed a man first. He didn't come often, maybe once every few weeks. An older man with a hunched back and a limp, moving slowly along the deeper edge of the woods. He never strayed far from the same narrow path, and he always carried a woven basket on his arm. The younger brother spotted him one afternoon and froze, eyes wide. "Person," he whispered. The older brother pulled him back instantly, both of them dropping low behind the roots. They watched in silence as the man passed by, stopping occasionally to pick mushrooms or dig something from the soil. "He's not looking," the younger brother whispered. "That doesn't matter," the older brother replied. "People don't have to look to be dangerous." But the man kept coming back, always alone, always quiet, never closer than the far side of the ravine. He never noticed the sycamore. Weeks later, the older brother made a decision he would have once considered unthinkable. He left something out. Just a small pile, 2 onions, a potato. Placed near the man's usual path, half hidden beneath leaves. Not a gift exactly. More like a test. They watched from concealment as the man stopped, frowned, and slowly knelt. He examined the food carefully, scanning the forest. The brothers held their breath. After a long moment, the man nodded to no one in particular, and placed a handful of dried mushrooms beside the pile before taking the vegetables and walking away. The younger brother exhaled so hard he nearly laughed. "He traded," he whispered. The older brother didn't smile, but something eased in his chest. They never spoke to the man. They never showed themselves. But the trade continued, silent and cautious. Vegetables for salt, roots for dried meat. Once a small block of beeswax, another time a scrap of cloth. It was enough. With supplies came improvements. The older brother sealed deeper cracks with clay mixed with ash and straw. The beeswax waterproofed bark containers. Salt changed food from survival to sustenance. The seasons shifted. Cold crept in earlier each evening. The forest thinned as leaves fell, exposing more ground, more sightlines. The brothers adjusted, adding more camouflage, dragging fallen leaves back toward the sycamore to maintain cover. Winter tested them. The first hard frost came overnight, turning the world brittle and sharp. The younger brother woke shivering, breath fogging the air inside the shelter. The older brother reacted immediately. He deepened the bedding, layered extra bark, repositioned the fire pit to trap heat more efficiently. They burned carefully, briefly, letting warmth soak into the wood before smothering the flame. Snow followed. It transformed the forest into something dangerous. Every footprint stood out. Every broken branch screamed evidence. They adapted. They stayed close. They harvested stored food. They moved only when necessary, brushing tracks away, walking in animal paths instead of making their own. The sycamore, insulated by earth and roots, held steady. Inside it was cold, but survivable. The younger brother grew during that winter, not just taller, but steadier. He stopped asking if someone was coming for them. He stopped dreaming out about old places. Instead, he asked practical questions. How do we make this stronger? What do we do if it falls? Where do we go next? The older brother didn't have all the answers, but he had enough now to keep them moving forward. By the time spring returned, thin and uncertain, the sycamore was no longer just shelter. It was proof. Proof that something broken could still stand, that being ignored could be an advantage, that survival wasn't loud or heroic. It was patient, careful, built from thousands of small, quiet decisions made correctly. One evening, as they sat outside watching Green return to the forest, the younger brother leaned against the root wall and said, "I think this place saved us." The older brother shook his head slowly. "No," he said, "we saved ourselves." But he rested his hand against the rough bark as he spoke, and he didn't pull it away. The end didn't arrive the way beginnings usually did. There was no single moment that announced it, no sharp line where one life stopped and another began. Instead, it unfolded quietly, almost politely, the way the door had closed behind them months ago. Only this time, it didn't lock anything away. The first sign was the tree itself. The older brother noticed it one morning while checking the inner wall, fingers tracing the familiar grooves and cracks. The bark felt different, drier. When the wind pushed through the forest, the sycamore answered with a deeper groan than usual, a sound that lingered too long after the movement stopped. He pressed his ear to the wood and listened. The tree was tired. He didn't say anything at first. Some truths needed time before they could be spoken out loud. Life around them kept moving. Spring strengthened into summer. Their garden thrived in careful disorder, leaves broad and confident now, roots thick beneath the soil. They harvested more than they ever had before, not enough to feel rich, but enough to plan beyond tomorrow. They dried food, stored it higher, wrapped it better. They talked less about surviving the next week and more about what came after. The younger brother had started wandering farther during the day, always within sight, always cautious, but curious in a way that felt new. He mapped the woods in his head, named landmarks no one else knew existed. He learned where the soil stayed damp longest, where the sun lingered late into the evening, where animals crossed regularly without ever stopping. One afternoon, he came back breathless, eyes bright. "There's a clearing," he said. "Not like a big one, just open enough." The older brother listened carefully. "How open?" "Open enough for light," the younger brother said, "and it's hidden. Surrounded on 3 sides, rocks on one." That night they talked longer than usual. The older brother finally said what he'd been holding back. "This tree won't last forever." The younger brother didn't argue. He nodded slowly. "I know." They didn't panic. They didn't rush. They had learned better than that. Instead, they prepared. They reinforced what they could, not to save the sycamore, but to buy time. They stored supplies in multiple places now, buried caches wrapped in bark and wax, marked only by arrangements of stones they both understood. They practiced moving camp quickly, packing only what mattered. They experimented with small shelters away from the tree, testing ground, testing wind, testing themselves. The sycamore watched over it all, silent and patient. The old man came one last time. He stopped farther away than usual, standing still for a long moment, basket hanging forgotten at his side. The brothers watched from concealment, hearts pounding. Something felt different. Slowly the man raised his hand, not waving, not beckoning, just acknowledging. Then he turned and walked away. He never returned. Late summer brought a storm unlike the others. It started with wind, low, restless, prowling through the trees like it was searching for something to break. The sky darkened early, clouds stacked thick and heavy. The older brother felt it in his bones, the way pressure settled into his chest. They secured what they could, checked every brace, every seal. The younger brother hovered close, unusually quiet. When the rain came, it came hard. Sheets of it hammered the forest, flattening undergrowth, flooding low ground. Thunder cracked overhead, splitting the sky open again and again. Inside the sycamore they waited. The tree shuddered with each gust, roots straining against softened earth. Dirt trickled down from above. A deep crack echoed somewhere within the trunk, loud enough that the younger brother grabbed the older one's arm. "Is it?" "I know," the older brother said, voice steady even as his pulse raced. "Just stay ready." They didn't sleep. They sat pressed together, listening to the forest tear at itself. At one point, a massive branch from another tree crashed nearby, the impact vibrating through the ground. Then, sometime just before dawn, it happened. Not a collapse, not yet. Just a shift. The sycamore settled suddenly, weight redistributing with a sound like a long, tired sigh. The inner wall split along a familiar crack, widening just enough to let a blade of rain cut through. That was enough. Older brother didn't hesitate. Now, they moved fast but quiet, muscle memory taking over. Supplies grabbed. fire smothered. Tracks brushed away even as rain erased most of them for free. They slipped out into the storm and vanished into the woods like they had never been there at all. They didn't look back. The new place wasn't better. It wasn't worse either. It was different. The clearing the younger brother had found held light longer than the forest floor, protected by stone and slope. They built low, into the ground, learning from the sycamore instead of copying it. Earth walls, natural drainage, a roof that followed the land instead of fighting it. They worked slowly, carefully. They made mistakes and corrected them. The shelter took shape not as a replacement but as a continuation. One morning, weeks later, they returned to the sycamore. What remained of it? The trunk had split further, partially collapsed inward. Rainwater pooled where they once slept. The garden still grew nearby, stubborn and green, but the tree itself was finally giving up. The younger brother stood very still. "It saved us," he said softly. The older brother nodded. "It did. They didn't take anything. They didn't need to. Everything important had already been carried forward." Years passed. The boys became young men. Their shelter became a homestead, invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. They expanded carefully, responsibly, always leaving room for retreat. They grew more food than they needed. They learned seasons, weather, soil. They learned themselves. Sometimes people passed near their land without ever knowing it. Sometimes others stayed a while. Quiet travelers, lost souls who understood the value of silence and exchange. The brothers helped when they could, cautiously, never forgetting what it felt like to have nowhere to go. And sometimes, late in the evening, when the fire burned low and the forest settled into its night rhythm, they talked about the past, about the door that closed without a sound, about the tree everyone else ignored, about the way survival had taught them more than comfort ever could. The sycamore eventually rotted back into the earth completely, its body feeding the soil it had protected for so long. In its place, new growth rose, strong, quiet, unremarkable to anyone passing by. Just like them, and the world, busy and loud and certain it understood everything worth noticing, never realized what it had missed.